They surrounded the elderly woman in the wheelchair, gripping her wheels and trapping her beneath the old oak trees, forcing her to sit helpless as they laughed and toyed with her fear. The bikers believed no one would challenge them, that intimidation and muscle were enough to own the moment. But they didn't count on the man running the outer path of the park, a man who noticed what others ignored, a man who stopped when cruelty crossed the line. He was a Navy SEAL, and with his K-9 at his side, he was about to deliver a kind of quiet justice they would never forget. Before we begin, tell us where you were watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more stories of courage, faith, and hope. Late afternoon settled over a southern park like warm honey, sunlight glazing the stone paths while ancient live oaks drooped with moss, the air thick with heat, jasmine, and the slow hush of cicadas. Evelyn Carter sat beneath the trees in a lightweight wheelchair that had become both companion and boundary, her frame small but upright, shoulders squared by habit rather than strength. At 72, her hair was a thin silver veil pulled neatly back from a face etched with fine lines that spoke less of age than of endurance. Her skin carried the soft pallor of someone who spent more time indoors than she wished, and her eyes, clear, gray-blue, still searched the world with a patient, appraising calm. Years earlier, a drunk driver had run a red light and changed the geometry of her life. The damage to her spine left her legs unresponsive, but it did not take her discipline. Evelyn learned to move forward with what remained, to accept help without surrendering dignity, to ration hope like water in summer. Each afternoon she came to the park, not for nostalgia, but for regulation, a ritual of breathing open space into a heart that had grown cautious. She wore a pale cotton blouse and a cardigan folded across her lap, fingers resting lightly on the armrests, as if reminding herself where she was anchored. There was no service dog today, no vigilant companion to mirror her mood, only a canvas tote with a water bottle, a paperback left open on a bench beside her, and the low music of leaves rubbing together overhead. The absence felt intentional. Evelyn wanted quiet, wanted to practice being unguarded for an hour, wanted to prove to herself that safety could still be a choice rather than a bargain. Her thoughts moved the way the shade did, slow, measured, making room. She counted breaths, remembered the weight of her old stride without bitterness, and allowed the ache in her lower back to rise and pass. The park had taught her this patience. Children had learned to walk here. Couples argued and reconciled. Joggers traced the loop like beads on a rosary. It was a place where lives overlapped without colliding, where a woman in a wheelchair could be ordinary if she wished. Evelyn wished for that ordinariness with the modest fervor of someone who knew its value. The sound that broke it arrived from a distance first, a coarse growl that did not belong to the park's grammar. Engines. Not the polite murmur of passing traffic beyond the hedges, but a throaty rev that swelled and climbed, vibrating the air as if announcing itself. Evelyn stiffened, a reflex she disliked but understood. She told herself it was only noise, only movement, and returned her gaze to the page. The revs grew louder, then multiplied, and the smell followed. Leather warm by sun, gasoline sharp as a warning. She felt the shift before she saw them. Three shapes separating from the edge of the path, moving with the easy entitlement of men accustomed to space bending around them. They wore black leather vests patched with wings and skulls, boots heavy, denim faded at the knees. The first was broad-shouldered and barrel-chested, his beard thick and trimmed, close to a jaw that looked carved rather than grown. His eyes were pale and appraising, and he smiled as if smiling were a test. The second was leaner, ropey with muscle, tattoos creeping from collar to wrist like inked vines. His gaze flicked and lingered, measuring reactions the way gamblers read cards. The third hung back half a step, narrower in the shoulders, a smirk playing at his mouth, eyes darting between his companions and the woman beneath the trees as if already rehearsing the story he would tell later. They were not rushing. They did not need to. Their confidence moved ahead of them like a shadow. Evelyn felt the air thicken around her. She closed the book with care, a small, deliberate sound that steadied her. Years of rehabilitation had taught her that panic shortened breath and breath shortened options. She cataloged details the way she had been taught after the accident. Number of people, distance, exits. She noted the bench to her left, the open path behind her, the fountain beyond the oaks. She reminded herself that she was visible, that it was daylight, that the park belonged to many. Still, a memory rose uninvited. The helplessness of wheels skidding on wet pavement, the sense of being held in place while the world decided for her. She pressed her thumb into the armrest until sensation returned, grounding herself in the present. The men drew closer, their boots scuffing stone. The broad one's hand rested casually near the handle of her chair, not touching yet, the promise in the gesture unmistakable. The tattooed man leaned in, breath sweet with alcohol despite the hour, his voice low and falsely gentle, a sweetness that curdled as soon as it was heard. The third laughed softly, a sound meant to entertain his friends more than to communicate. Evelyn lifted her chin, meeting their eyes without challenge or apology, and spoke with the measured clarity she used at pharmacies and city offices, the tone that assumed compliance because it deserved it. She asked them to move along, to give her space. The request was reasonable. That was its mistake. She saw it land and ignite something brittle in them, the way a spark finds a pocket of gas. The tattooed man's smile thinned. The bearded one's eyes hardened. The third shifted to block the path, with a practiced ease that told her this choreography was familiar. The shade beneath the oaks deepened, and the park's ordinary sounds seemed to retreat, leaving Evelyn with the awareness of her breath, her chair, and the quiet truth that this moment would test the careful equilibrium she had built. She did not know yet how it would end. She only knew she would not surrender herself to fear without first naming it, and that resolve, thin as it felt, was still hers. The three men closed the remaining distance with the unhurried confidence of predators who believed the ground belonged to them, their boots scuffing stone as if to announce ownership. Duke Knuckles Maddox moved first, his bulk filling space the way a wall does when it shifts too close. He was built wide through the shoulders, thick forearms corded with old strength rather than gym polish, his beard a dense curtain trimmed just enough to look intentional. Duke's smile was the most dangerous thing about him. Not loud, not playful, but tight, as if he had learned long ago that showing too much joy invited challenge. Years on the road had taught him hierarchy, and he lived by it. People either yielded or were made to, and the lesson was always the same. He placed one large hand on the push bar of Evelyn's wheelchair, fingers curling possessively, testing how much resistance the world would offer today. Rex Callahan slid to Duke's right, leaner and quicker, a man whose movements suggested he enjoyed watching reactions more than causing them. His face was narrow, cheekbones sharp beneath skin weathered by sun and wind, and his eyes, dark, restless, never settled in one place for long. Tattoos climbed his neck and vanished under the collar of his vest, ink earned in different towns, different nights, each one a souvenir of a line crossed. Rex had once been the kind of man who laughed easily. Then a bar fight years back had left him with a permanent stiffness in his left hand and a bitter respect for pain. Since then, he treated violence like a game of timing, savoring the moment before impact. He leaned in close to Evelyn, breath sweetened by cheap whiskey despite the afternoon, his voice low and coaxing, as if kindness were something he could put on and take off at will. Behind them hovered Troy Switch Bennett, thinner, his shoulders sloped rather than squared, eyes darting from Duke to Rex and back again. Troy's hair was cropped short and uneven, as if cut in a hurry, and his grin arrived a half-second too late to be genuine. He had learned early that survival meant alignment. Stand with the loudest voice, amplify it, and never be the first to act. Troy's talent was escalation. He nudged situations from uncomfortable to ugly with a joke, a block, a shove that could later be denied. He shifted to the front of Evelyn's chair, placing himself squarely in the path, pretending to admire the fountain beyond her while ensuring there would be no easy exit. Evelyn felt the hand on her chair before she fully processed the words, a jolt of heat flushing up her spine. She kept her chin level and her tone even, the same tone she used with clerks and bureaucrats. The voice that assumed reason would be honored because it was reasonable. She asked them to move along, to give her space. The request hung there, clean and simple. Duke's smile thinned. Rex's eyes flicked to Duke, then back to Evelyn, gauging the shift. Troy's grin widened, encouraged by the tension. What Evelyn could not see, but felt, was the brittle pride snapping into place. To men like these, refusal from someone who could not stand felt like a personal insult, a challenge to an order they believed immutable. Duke tightened his grip on the push bar just enough to be felt. Not a shove, not yet. Rex tilted his head, studying Evelyn's face, the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the steadiness that did not crack. He circled a half step, blocking her peripheral vision, and asked again, voice honeyed and cruel beneath the sweetness, whether she was lost. Troy chuckled and leaned in closer from the front, his boot tapping lightly against the stone, a rhythmic sound meant to unsettle. Evelyn's pulse quickened, but she kept her breathing slow. She had learned this after the accident, during endless sessions of physical therapy and long nights replaying the sound of metal folding. Panic stole oxygen, and oxygen was leverage. She pressed her thumb into the armrest, grounding herself in texture and pressure, reminding herself that she was here, that the present was not the past. Around them, the park continued in fragments. A jogger passed at a distance, earbuds in, oblivious, leaves whispered overhead. The fountain's water caught the sun. Evelyn cataloged details the way she had been taught, positions, hands, faces, because attention was the only defense she had left. Duke's stance was square and planted, Rex's weight on the balls of his feet, ready to move, Troy's shoulders angled toward Duke, awaiting instruction. The choreography tightened. Duke's hands slid from the push bar to the wheel itself, fingers brushing the rubber, a small, deliberate invasion. Troy adjusted his position to fully block the path. Rex leaned closer, invading her space until she could smell leather and alcohol and something sour beneath it. "Please," Evelyn said again, the word firm rather than pleading. It was not a request now, it was a boundary. The effect was immediate and wrong. Duke's jaw set, a muscle jumping beneath his beard. Rex's smile vanished, replaced by a look of irritation that flashed and then smoothed into something colder. Troy laughed a little too loudly, eager to keep the moment moving forward. Duke spoke then, his voice low and carrying, the sound of a man used to being obeyed. He told her to relax, to let go, to stop making things difficult. The words were casual, the meaning was not. Evelyn felt the familiar edge of fear rise, sharp and insistent, but she did not give it her voice. She had survived worse than this, she reminded herself. She had endured mornings when her legs would not answer, nights when the ceiling felt like a lid. She would not surrender the small square of dignity she occupied now. She met Duke's eyes and held them, unblinking. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered there, surprise perhaps, or annoyance at the inconvenience of resistance. Then Rex laughed softly, a sound that signaled permission, and Troy shifted his weight forward, sealing the circle. The shade beneath the oaks deepened, and the space around Evelyn narrowed to breath, rubber, and the knowledge that the line had been crossed. Whatever happened next would not be accidental, it would be chosen. Jack Mercer had been running the outer loop of the park long enough to know its rhythms by heart. The subtle rises in the path, the places where roots pushed up through stone, the way the light shifted near the old fountain as in late afternoon. He ran without headphones, sweat darkening the collar of his gray t-shirt, breath steady and controlled. At 33, Jack's body carried the dense, coiled strength of someone forged by repetition rather than display. His shoulders were squared, his back straight, and his movements economical, every stride landing where it needed to land. A faint scar traced the line of his jaw, half hidden by short stubble, souvenir from a training accident years earlier, one that had taught him the cost of distraction. Since then, he lived alert even in places meant for rest. At his side ran Titan, a 5-year-old German shepherd with a powerful chest and a clean black and tan coat that gleamed despite the heat. Titan's ears stayed high and expressive, constantly adjusting to sound, while his dark eyes tracked movement with quiet intelligence. The dog wore a simple working collar and a short lead looped loosely around Jack's wrist. Not because Titan needed restraint, but because discipline was ritual. Years of canine training had shaped Titan into a creature of balance, protective without recklessness, focused without tension. His gait was smooth and silent, paws landing almost soundlessly, breath synchronized with Jack's. To strangers he looked calm, even gentle, but Jack knew the truth. Titan was all thresholds and instincts, a wolf that had learned the language of commands. Jack was halfway through a controlled exhale when the sound reached him, faint at first and then unmistakable, a sharp metallic scrape that did not belong to the park's vocabulary. It was followed by a sound far more unsettling, a choked, startled cry, thin with age and fear. Jack's body responded before his mind finished assembling meaning. His pace faltered for less than a heartbeat, then shifted, his feet pivoting on muscle memory. Titan's ears snapped forward, his stride shortening as his focus locked onto the direction of the noise. There was no command spoken, none was needed. As they cut off the path and across the grass, Jack's awareness sharpened into something colder and narrower. He took in the scene in fragments as he closed the distance. 3 men clustered too tightly, black leather catching the sun, their stances aggressive and careless. A wheelchair partially turned, one wheel blocked. A woman seated rigidly upright, chin lifted, hands clenched on the armrests. The way the men positioned themselves told Jack everything. This was not confusion or conversation. This was containment. Jack felt the old familiar pressure rise behind his ribs, not rage, not yet, but the readiness that had been trained into him across years of deployment and loss. He had learned early that anger blurred judgment, control sharpened it. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a memory surfaced of his first deployment, the moment he realized that hesitation could cost lives. That understanding had settled into him like bone. Now it guided his feet. The men noticed him almost too late. Troy, the thinner one, caught movement first, his head turning just enough for his smirk to falter. Duke's broad shoulders shifted, instinctive, as if he sensed a change in the air pressure. Rex's eyes narrowed, scanning, calculating. To them, Jack was just a runner at first. Sweat-soaked, breathing hard, nothing special. Then they saw his eyes, flat, focused, unimpressed. Jack slowed to a stop a few steps away, not rushing in, not posturing. Titan came to a halt beside him, body angled forward, tail low and still. The dog's presence altered the geometry of the space immediately. He did not bark. He did not lunge. He simply watched, head level, eyes fixed on the hands nearest the wheelchair. It was the kind of stillness that made people uneasy, the stillness of something that knew exactly what it could do and was choosing not to. Jack's gaze flicked briefly to the woman in the chair. He took in her age, the tension in her shoulders, the controlled fear in her eyes. He noted the way her fingers pressed white against the armrests. He gave her a small nod, not reassurance, not pity, just acknowledgement. You are seen. Then his attention returned to the men. What's going on here? Jack asked, his voice even, unraised, carrying just enough to cut through the cicadas. Duke laughed, a short, dismissive sound. Mind your run, buddy. His hand tightened on the wheelchair wheel, a reflexive assertion of control. Titan's head lowered by a fraction, a soft, almost inaudible rumble vibrating in his chest. Jack felt it through the lead, a question waiting for permission. He did not answer it. Instead, he took one deliberate step closer, closing the space just enough to change the balance. His posture remained relaxed, but the line of his shoulders shifted, blocking Duke's easy dominance. Rex's eyes flicked to Titan, then back to Jack, his jaw tightening. Troy's grin was gone now, replaced by something closer to uncertainty. Jack did not threaten. He did not explain himself. He had learned long ago that explanations invited argument, and argument wasted time. He simply stood where he stood, occupying the space with quiet authority. The heat pressed down, sweat trickling along his spine, but the moment felt oddly suspended, as if the park itself had paused to see what would happen next. The men exchanged glances. Duke weighed his options, pride warring with instinct. Rex shifted his stance, reassessing the odds. Troy took a half step back without seeming to notice he'd done it. The cone jaw that had arrived was no longer subtle. It was unmistakable. Whatever control they thought they had was slipping, not through force, but through presence. Jack kept his eyes on Duke's hand. Titan kept his eyes on the same hand. Between them, the message was clear, even if no one said it aloud. This was the edge of the moment, the point at which things would either break open or fall apart, and Jack was ready for either. Jack did not raise his voice or explain himself. He simply stepped forward as if crossing a familiar threshold, the kind that separates noise from consequence. His posture shifted, subtle, economical, and the effect rippled outward. Rex felt it first, the pressure of space closing where he expected compliance. Jack angled his body to cut Rex off from the wheelchair, one shoulder leading, feet planted with a runner's balance, forcing Rex to retreat half a step without ever being touched. Rex's tattoos flexed as his jaw tightened, a flash of resentment passing over his narrow face. He had been in fights before, but this was different. There was no invitation to perform, no audience for bravado, only a calm refusal that made his options feel smaller. Titan mirrored the movement with the precision of a living hinge. The German Shepherd lowered his center of gravity, forelegs braced, tail still, ears forward like antennae tuned to danger. His coat, black along the back and warm tan at the chest and legs, caught the sun in clean lines that emphasized muscle rather than bulk. At 5 years old, Titan carried the assurance of maturity. No puppy fidget, no wasted motion. His eyes fixed on Duke's hands, tracking micro movements with predatory patience. He did not bark. He did not bare his teeth. The quiet was deliberate, a warning delivered without drama. Duke reacted with the instinct of a man used to forcing outcomes. His fingers tightened on the wheelchair wheel, thick knuckles blanching. He leaned in, shoulders squaring as if to reassert gravity. Jack moved then, not fast, not slow, but exactly on time. He caught Duke's wrist with a compact grip, thumb pressing into a precise point where tendon met bone, and rotated just enough to break leverage. Duke's breath left him in a sharp hiss as the pressure bit. The hand released the wheel. Jack did not throw Duke or shove him. He simply held until the message landed. Years ago, during training, Jack had learned that restraint was louder than violence. The lesson had stayed with him through deployments and long nights when control meant survival. Troy attempted the angle play, circling behind with the skittish energy of a man who wanted to be helpful without being brave. Titan's head turned, tracking Troy's footfalls, and the dog issued a low, resonant growl that vibrated through the air like a bass note. Troy froze mid-step. The sound was not threatening so much as absolute, the acoustic equivalent of a locked door. He swallowed, eyes flicking from Titan to Jack, calculating risk in a language he barely understood. He took a step back, then another, the geometry of the scene shifting away from him. Jack dropped into a crouch beside Evelyn, bringing himself level with her gaze. Up close, his face showed the lines of a man who had learned to carry weight without advertising it. A scar near the jaw softened by short stubble, eyes gray and steady, the kind that didn't rush to conclusions. "Are you all right?" he asked, voice low and even, pitched for her ears alone. The question was simple, but it did what it needed to do. It returned agency. Evelyn felt her breath catch, then steady. She nodded once, lifting her chin, meeting his eyes with the stubborn light of someone who had lost much and refused to disappear. Her hands loosened their grip on the armrests. The world narrowed to this small island of calm. Around them, the park exhaled. A couple paused near the path, uncertain. A fountain splashed. Cicadas resumed their rhythm. Duke rolled his wrist, scowling, pride bruised in a way that had nothing to do with pain. Rex weighed the scene with gambler's eyes and found the odds had turned sour. Troy's shoulders slumped, the energy draining out of him now. That escalation had failed. None of them spoke. Jack did not need them to. He stood again, placing himself between the men and Evelyn, occupying the space with the same quiet certainty he had carried into worse rooms than this. Duke broke the silence with a laugh that rang hollow. He muttered something about a misunderstanding, about people being too sensitive these days. Jack did not answer. Titan did not move. The absence of response did more than any retort could have. It stripped Duke's words of traction. One by one, the men disengaged, not because they had become better, but because they had become smaller. Pride told them to stay. Instinct told them to leave. Instinct won. They backed away in uneven steps, leather creaking, boots scuffing stone. Rex kept his eyes on Jack until the last possible moment, then looked away as if the sun were suddenly too bright. Troy avoided Titan's gaze altogether. Duke turned last, jaw tight, shoulders stiff, retreating with the reluctant dignity of someone who would tell the story later in a different tone. When they were gone, the air felt lighter, as if the shade itself had lifted. Jack remained where he was for a count of 10, scanning the perimeter, letting the moment settle. Titan rose from his low stance and sat beside the wheelchair, close but not crowding, a sentinel returning to neutral. Jack glanced back to Evelyn, checking her posture, her color, the steadiness of her hands. "We'll get you somewhere cool," he said, practical now, the work continuing. Evelyn nodded again, a small smile flickering at the corner of her mouth. A victory measured not in cheers, but in the return of breath. Quiet justice rarely announces itself. It arrives, does what it must, and leaves the scene intact enough for ordinary life to resume. Under the oaks, that was enough. Jack guided Evelyn away from the open paths and toward a stand of trees where the shade pooled thick and cool, the air noticeably calmer than the sunlit stone they had left behind. He moved with practical efficiency, not touching her chair without asking, keeping his body angled outward as if the park itself might lunge. Titan settled beside the wheel, close enough to be reassuring without crowding, his breathing steady, eyes tracking movement with an ease that suggested vigilance had become a kind of rest for him. Evelyn felt the tremor in her hands begin to fade. Shock, she knew, arrived late and left slowly. It needed room to pass. Jack gave it room. He called for assistance with brief, precise words, then took out a small notebook and wrote down times and descriptions, the ritual of documentation anchoring the moment to facts rather than fear. They sat together in the shade while the park resumed its rhythm. Titan leaned forward once, pressing his nose lightly against Evelyn's knuckles, a deliberate, gentle contact that surprised her with its warmth. The dog's muzzle was broad and expressive, his whiskers pale against the darker fur, his eyes attentive but kind. At 5 years old, Titan had learned when not to perform. Evelyn smiled despite herself, the kind of smile that came from being recognized rather than entertained. "Thank you," she said to the dog, then caught herself and laughed softly. Titan accepted the gratitude with dignified stillness. When she spoke again, her voice carried the careful cadence of someone choosing honesty over drama. She told Jack about the accident, how a truck had run the light, how the sound of metal folding still visited her dreams, how she had woken to a ceiling that felt too low and a future that felt too narrow. She described the months that followed, the relearning of mornings, the negotiations with pain, the way independence had to be rebuilt from small, stubborn acts. Jack listened without interruption. His face did not soften into pity. It remained attentive, respectful. He had seen stories like hers before in different uniforms and different rooms. Survival wore many shapes. He recognized it when he saw it. A park ranger named Samuel Ortiz arrived first, a compact man in his early 40s with sun-darkened skin and a neatly trimmed mustache. His uniform was worn at the seams in the way of someone who spent more time walking than sitting. Samuel's voice was calm, practiced, and he addressed Evelyn directly, crouching to her level as he asked if she needed medical attention. She declined, grateful for the option rather than the insistence. A few minutes later, a paramedic unit rolled in, and with them came Sarah Whitmore, a volunteer EMT with pale skin, freckled by years in the sun, strawberry blonde hair pulled into a practical knot. Sarah was tall and lean, her movements efficient but gentle, eyes quick to assess and slower to judge. She checked Evelyn's vitals with quiet competence and nodded. "You're shaken," she said plainly, "but you're steady." The words mattered more than the numbers. While procedures wrapped the moment in normalcy, Jack stepped a few feet aside with Titan, scanning the perimeter out of habit. He thought of the way Duke's pride had cracked, of the look in Rex's eyes when calculation replaced swagger, of Troy's retreat. He had learned not to confuse retreat with resolution. The road home, he knew, was where consequences often returned. When the paramedics finished, Jack came back and knelt beside Evelyn again. "I can stay until you're set," he said, "or I can walk you to your car." She chose the latter. Choice mattered. They moved together through the park, the path shorter now, the day cooling as the sun dipped. Evelyn noticed how people looked at Jack and Titan, not with fear, but with curiosity, and how that attention felt different than before. She felt less exposed. At her car, Jack helped with the ramp and made sure everything was secure. He did not hover. He did not rush. When he was satisfied, he took a small card from his pocket and wrote a number on it in block letters. He held it out, not ceremoniously, just enough to be clear. "If they come back," he said, voice low and certain, "you call me. Anytime. Titan and I will come." There was no flourish in the promise, no attempt to soften it. It landed like a knot tied by someone who knew rope. Evelyn took the card and folded it once, pressing it into the pocket of her tote. She looked up at him, really looked, and saw a man shaped by choices made under pressure and kept after the pressure passed. "I believe you," she said. It felt like an exchange rather than a thanks. As she drove away, Titan watched until the car disappeared beyond the trees. Jack stood a moment longer, listening to the park, then turned back toward the path, the day closing around him. He thought of how easily dignity could be threatened, and how quietly it could be defended. Quiet justice did not announce itself with sirens. It showed up, did its work, and left behind a simple truth that could be carried home. Some miracles do not arrive with thunder or blinding light. They come quietly, wrapped in ordinary moments, revealed only when we look back and realize that God placed the right people in the right place at the right time. A miracle is not always the removal of suffering. It is the presence of grace when suffering could have won. Evelyn was not healed of her paralysis. Jack did not descend as an angel. Titan did not speak. Yet beneath the old oak trees, God moved through courage, discipline, and compassion. This is how God often works in our world, not loudly, not for applause, but through willing hearts that choose to stand between harm and the vulnerable. In our daily lives, many of us feel unseen, dismissed, or overwhelmed. You may be tired of being strong. You may feel small in a harsh world. But remember this, you are never invisible to God. He sees you. And sometimes He answers prayers not by changing circumstances, but by sending someone, perhaps an unexpected stranger, perhaps even you, to be the answer. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what moment moved you most, or what lesson you took with you, and subscribe to this channel to continue hearing stories of faith, quiet courage, and the everyday miracles still happening around us. May God bless you and your family. May He protect you from harm, strengthen you when you feel weak, and guide your steps so that you may be a light to others, just as He was in this story. Amen.